Uh, Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Firstly, I would like to thank the organizers of OCCION 2017 for giving me this honor and this privilege to come and address you today at this forum. I seem to speak at and get involved in some more and more forums here in India, which is something which is very, very welcome. India is a very close place to our hearts, and even our Crown Prince only visited you in your recent celebrations. So there is a very strong relationship between the United Arab Emirates and incredible India. So very happy to be here. As Mr. Chairman said, my experience mainly is I'm an environmental engineer and really more worked more on the safety side of things. But I also had the good chance and good experience with our organization to help set up an occupational health policy and occupational health center within ENOC, which completed now 10 years of operation. And the last session actually was a very good introduction, because I will be able to go through inshallah, the slides much faster, because my colleagues before had explained from the safety perspective, the occupational safety perspective, and the occupational health
I'm Dr. Deepak Chopra,
so
and I want to welcome you to JIO. JIO is your personal well-being.
And talk about, pragmatically some of the challenges that organizations, because I know more and more organizations, not only in the oil and gas sector, but in the manufacturing sector and in other industry sectors, are always looking at this. And the old style of management in many of these big organizations has been that occupational health and health is something which should be only done by professionals, and maybe they don't recognize very much the importance of occupational health, as the previous doctor mentioned about the great benefits of reducing incidents and doing things. So I'll talk about some of those things. But this presentation really is talking about what we went through. I'll go through various aspects of the literature review, but also then talk about what we did. And I'll try to focus more about what we did and what were the benefits, etc. There is a detailed paper which was published on this, so if you are interested in the details, it is in that presentation. I don't know if I have enough time to go through all the details of that. Okay, so this case study outline, I'll give you a basic objective and talk to you about some of the background and methodology, and talk about some of the key aspects that were raised in the practitioner research, and the establishing the organizational benefits of setting up an occupational health services center within your organization, and the different models and the pros and cons, because one of the biggest problems is where to locate this particular function within the organization, and we'll go through a discussion of that. So we did a technical research paper on various things on what other organizations has been doing, and especially in the oil and gas sector around the world. The ENOC is the Emirates National Oil Company. It is the largest oil and gas company of Dubai. It's owned by the government of Dubai, and it's made up of about 30 operating subsidiaries, operating right through from upstream, right down to retail and supply of petrol stations and convenience stores. So the research question here really is, organizationally, where does the function best fit? But to answer that question, it's not that simple. So we did a review of the various literature, about 12 different research papers from the year about 2000 onwards. So the last decade of work, because that's where mainly most of the focus of that work has been. And we've had discussions also with managers and practitioners, and we have given some personal reflections. So to go through the literature review very quickly. So obviously scientific research shows that exposure analysis proves that years of actual risks can be better understood, for example, the cumulative effects and the acute and long-term effects of being exposed to various compounds. This is well documented from the example of benzene exposure, for example, for the oil and gas sector. But this is a very interesting quotation here from one of the papers. It says, health surveillance will no longer be used to identify any early health effect, but to actively demonstrate that workplaces are safe and have no health impact. Occupational health, therefore, should be broken. Its scope should be involved with environmental health. What impact do these activities have on the neighboring population? And many jobs in the petroleum industry are becoming more and more complex, requiring more skills and intervention. On the occupational health enterprise benefits and costs, we always have seen that the company doctors were sometimes criticized by employees as if they are perceived to generally be working for the interest of the employer rather than the employee. But obviously, as we know, if the employer has got a good welfare system and is able to demonstrate to the employees that there is that they are taking care of them, they should not really be criticized because their goals should be one: the employee and the employer is one. So we have to look at really applying a economic yardstick to medical practice. So occupational function within an organization can help really extend the productive years of employees, reduce costs of medical care, and conserve human resources, which can be seen as an organization in business terms. So that is really where the return on investment is within a business, and that is exactly the reason why it is difficult to explain that to the CFO of an organization. Because, but today it's becoming more and more acute a problem, because especially in the oil and gas sector, we have an aging population, and we need to have this expertise remain longer with us in our organizations. Also, there is expansion and growth, and energy requirements are increasing, and therefore we need to extend the lives and extend the productive lives of our employees. And you'll find in many organizations today, they have policies for people who are working even post-retirement. The socioeconomic effects of occupational health, Miller here explains that there are economics of occupational provision. So occupational strategy should be founded on drivers such as obviously humanitarianism, public health, and social justice perspectives. And I think this was discussed earlier on by one of the speakers. Future and sustainability of occupational health is more related and more to the internal organizational drivers. Therefore, they must be understood really, when we are giving this kind of economic justification for the provision of the resources and the money that is spent in occupational health. At the moment, if we give examples from the UK and the EU, the cost of ill health and medical injuries has been quantified, and it is really in the millions, if not in the billions. So occupational professions are still struggling to attract the level of resources which are required and needed. The processes that are suggested by some researchers say that strategically choose a direction through reviewing the current and comparable performances and endorsing the value-risk assessment for each type of business. Then establish the issues of the greatest importance. So therefore, just focus on the issues which are most prominent in your industry and develop options for successes and for the direction of occupational health services, and then implement and monitor and assess to make improvements. So the impact of fitness, obviously on lost days, this can be easily economically just quantified. Difficult to quantify the productivity caused by more fit employees or less fit employees. Future analysis of costs which are related to occupational health strategy always dominates, and thus direct cost value contributions such as employee presenteeism. I'm taking it that the audience is familiar with this term of presenteeism as opposed to absenteeism, right? And the impacts of that, the lowered productivity of people at work. And this is really is a big problem and becoming even a bigger problem for us in the Middle East. Indirect use of values and impact on morale, obviously, staff retention, and the corporate image also. Wellness programs today, many organizations, as part of their CSR program, are doing a lot of wellness programs because, they believe that is what is driving change and making the employer an employer of choice. Option values for employees, such as reduces uncertainty for them, and they thus derive some economic value from that. And non-use value, obviously, the existence value, and as such, people see it as useful to be there, although they might not necessarily use it. And this is actually what we experienced in ENOC. We found that in the beginning, for the first 2-3 years, we had a lot of resistance from the employees. Today, the employees thank us very much for having this function established within the group. Loss prevention, obviously, we have previous speakers have spoken about fatigue and the impact of fatigue as a contributor to accidents involving transportation. Today, we have implemented in ENOC even a system where drivers of heavy good vehicles, the ones who are carrying the petroleum products, there is a motion sensor camera which detects if the driver is falling asleep, nodding off, and then it is connected, interlocked to the chair, and the chair will start to vibrate to wake up the driver in case he falls asleep. We would not have been able to justify even that pilot with the management. If we had not shown them that occupational health problems and fatigue management is a major issue in preventing major loss. And more recent research in recent years has shown that long work hours, night working, working without adequate breaks, adequate rest between shifts, and unfavorable shift patterns also, especially in repetitive jobs, and even working in comfortable, cozy sitting positions that can promote sleep. One of the biggest issues is in control rooms, for example. Control rooms today in the oil and gas sectors, the control rooms are very dim lighting, like the lighting that we have in this room, maybe even dimmer. And this can promote, obviously, sleepiness. And today, input from occupational practitioners is undertaken when formulating work rosters. So this is something that we are implementing as well. Also, the impacts on sustainable growth over an extended period of time. There is health and safety, obviously, is at the intersection of economic and social factors. And, we estimate here that, health factors cost the organization anywhere between about $1,000 to $1,500 per employee per year. This number is, I think, taken from statistics back in 2004, and therefore, this number is probably more closer to about $2,500 now. Sickness, absence, reduced performance, occupational illnesses, workers' compensation, litigations also, and environmental incidents. So these costs are not easily measured directly, and therefore improved health means improves the worker productivity and benefits that investment include, in healthy workforce, improved motivation and performance, and reduce premature retirement and also death. So now we'll move on to the benefits quickly. So obviously the summary of benefits, so this is well documented now in the research of the last decade or so, more than a decade now. Reduced productivity, loss of workers, reduced sick pay, reduced litigation. We have medical insurance also can be impacted. Better reduction management and prevention of root causes leading to medical and social issues, such as because of stress at work, or people being unhappy because they are not, when you are feeling fatigued, when you are feeling tired, when you're going to work and you're also feeling stressed, this might lead to, for example, drug abuse, alcoholism, excessive smoking, and even in some cases domestic violence and other issues like that. So secondary and tertiary issues of so improved motivation of employees, obviously, healthier workforce in general with less presenteeism and higher productivity as a consequence of that, and reduced premature retirement and death, also and loss of this intellectual human capital. So loss prevention and recognized to be a challenging matter to deal with high hazard industries. And obviously, from the legalistic side, the reasonable care today, more and more we can argue that if you don't have these kind of programs that prevent, it's very likely that you might have incidents, and maybe in the future organizations will be taken to task by the authorities that they have not put in programs that have now clearly the research shows that there is a linkage between the loss, and bad occupational health. Okay, so the question is that where do we locate this function within the organization? Because this is a big question. Once you've been able to convince the executive management that they should spend some money on this, then becomes a challenge of who do we give the burden of this to? And you'll see all around the world, occupational health functions are reporting directly to management, reporting to risk management departments, to HSE, to HR, etc. So where should it sit? So we did an analysis. If we put it as part of the human resources function, then it's part of employee services, so it makes good sense. Its interaction is high with HR. In fact, even in ENOC, we're interacting very much with the HR function. It's part of employee welfare, so it's good. There is, or supposedly there is, a great deal of confidentiality when it comes to the HR department. They are used to dealing with employee files and confidentiality, etc. Industrial injuries and illnesses, no, there is a challenge there because, can HR people, are they trained? Do they understand enough to be able to identify the industrial injuries and illnesses? They're also, they're supposed to be managing leave management. So are they able to manage sick leave management? And so I'll explain later how we do that in ENOC. And employee support, obviously. They are getting involved sometimes in allowing the different types of shift patterns and working hours, mainly from a rostering point of view or from a compensation point of view. Here we are talking about from a technical point of view. So it's questionable, do they have the ability to do that? The HR policies also, you need to capture occupational health in the HR policies, so they are the policy holders. And also they are involved because they're the gatekeepers for the employment, unemployment, retirement, etc. So, it sits with the pre-employment. And, if you're a large organization or small organization or medium-sized organization, you will always have some sort of HR function within the organization. Not all organizations have a full-fledged EHS functions or risk management functions, etc. But it is and will probably remain always a non-technical function. If we say that we will put it in the risk management function, as a risk management function, as an independent function focusing on risk and human capital besides other risks, looking at increasing productivity, risk management really is looking at managing loss rather than looking at increasing productivity. Here we argue that occupational health makes good business. So you have better healthy people, you get better productivity from them. Risk management also looks at holistic risks and risk control strategies and mechanisms. So they would appreciate that occupational health if you are able to demonstrate the relationship, the correlations. Inherently, it is also nature that organizational interests will be taken in the first instance. So that might be good and bad. This is why at the outset it's probably not fair function to have occupational health probably management under. Occupational health ultimately is the preventative paradigm, looks at improving and maintaining good occupational health of the employee to prevent lack of productivity. So partial incapacitation, lowered output in days of work, etc. If we put it with the health and safety function, at the moment in ENOC it sits with the EHS function, but that is more for historical and EHS or legacy issues of the organization. Technically, it currently is the most relevant function because they do job safety task analysis, job hazard profile analysis, etc. Looking at increasing productivity when quality and operational excellence is integrated. So if that is the function of the EHS, then that works well with that. It also looks at holistic risks and risk control strategies and mechanisms from an operational, very much an operational sense. Confidentiality might be an issue in the absence of having proper controls. On-site management and coordination, there's always EHS people on site, so they can always give the feedback, the information on the risks, etc. Industrial hygiene function, and when it exists in an organization, this is a big, I know, the debate between the occupational health practitioners, the safety practitioners, and the industrial hygienists find themselves somewhere lost in the middle. They don't know which camp they belong to, but they probably belong to a camp somewhere in between. Control strategies also, can be direct. So EHS organizations are, tasked with, for example, putting, hearing conservation programs and implementing that. So it makes sense to put it there as well. Depends on the level of integration of the different other functions as well, because, EHS sometimes in organizations is very much standalone. If you have very good EHS working with the other organizations, then it would help very much with occupational health. And most organizations do not have an occupational health standalone, and generally it is integrated with primary health. But if you don't have primary health function within an organization, then occupational health would have to sit somewhere else and probably sits with EHS. If you have a primary health function, then the occupational health can maybe sit there as a subsection of the primary health medical facilities that your organization is giving. It can be an independent function, depends obviously on the size of the company and depends on the legalities and jurisdictions. There's an issue of liability as well. Even then, in the reporting structure, would it directly report to the CEO? I don't know. Most organizations do not have occupational health as a standalone and generally integrated, as I said, with primary health. And so how much independence would it have, right? If you outsource it to a third-party function, it's easier and cheaper to hire, but I'll tell you also from our experience what has happened when we tried to do that. Or we thought about trying to do that. You can hire in the expertise to conduct some of the activities. It will portray both independence and objectivity by engaging a third party to do the evaluations. Yeah? But it will have a limited scope, except with diversified operations. And with small companies, less than 3,000 to 5,000 employees, maybe it makes sense to run it cheaper. But if it is a larger organization than 3,000 employees, we think, well, we believe from our calculations that it would be more expensive to outsource it. And for more complex analysis, you just pay more and get more analysis as you require. The other thing is also that the outsourced party functions, as you know, primary health is about dealing with people who are unhealthy or have got a problem. Occupational health is dealing with Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman. It's okay? I will continue? Maybe 5 minutes more. Yeah. Okay. So in these kind of functions, if you have an independent or outsourced function, the problem is that in occupational health, you might go and they might ask for more and more tests, because that's where really the revenue is made when you're dealing with independent parties, because you're dealing with healthy people. So if you're unhealthy, then you can do a lot of tests. If you're healthy, then there's a limitation to the number of tests that they can get you to do or convince you to do. Limited to conducting medicals and do some surveys, also industrial hygiene surveys. It's more reactive, it's preventative medicine rather than being part of an overall function of integrated information and awareness building in the workforce. Because are they going to run, for example, the statistics for you and tell you, okay, you have the average people that you have within an organization have got BMI problem or having a cholesterol problem or whatever, you'd have to pay a lot more for that kind of service, the analysis and diagnostics. Difficult to see employees becoming more acquainted also with occupational health staff because they're not part of the organization. Limited long-term case management continuity because every 2-3 years you have to re-tender this and it might go to someone else, and that other person has no history. You'll have to just look at the files of the other organization, and if he makes a mistake, then he'll just blame the guy who did the initial pre-employment medical. Limited long-term case, naturally more employer service focused, not employee service focused, because the employer is paying him, and medical practitioner and nursing staff acquaintance with the industrial conditions of facilities. And this is one of the most critical aspects actually, that your team, your occupational team and your doctors and nurses should understand the nature of your operations in order when they're doing the assessments to give you the right kind of level of advice. And can be an expensive auction and interaction mainly with HR and not the line managers. See here, the health of the employee, the welfare of the employee is primarily the responsibility of the line manager, not of the occupational health function. We had many discussions with our line managers and saying, no, the doctor said, shall we employ the guy or shall we not employ the guy? And then we explained to the line manager, it's not the job of the doctor to tell you employ him or not employ him. It's his job to tell you what risk, the risk level. And then you as the line manager should make the decision on employing or not employing or doing, because you are going to be responsible for the case management also, for giving the work limitations or making sure that you do not stress this worker out or get him not to do certain tasks which might increase the chance of him getting injured or ill. So the considerations when making the decision, you can use many different types of analysis, SWOT analysis, cost-benefit analysis, organizational culture assessments, legal compliance and liability exposure assessment depending on the legal framework within your country or where you're operating. Surveys with employees and managers and benchmarking with other organizations is something that we did a lot to get to it. And then there's pragmatics to be considered. What is the current organizational capacity and appetite, readiness for functional managers to accept that responsibility, that very responsibility that they have to take the advice from the doctor about their employees and then deal with that. And the organizational capabilities, obviously. And, in some places in the world, there's a good availability of good outsource agencies. That is not the case in Dubai, for example. There are other considerations, as I said, what do we gain from establishing an in-house function capability? Before I get to this, because all this information is available in the paper, I'll give you an example. We attempted at first, before setting up this function in 2005, to actually outsource. So we went out and we had like our refinery staff, and we sent a request for quotation or request for quotation from one of the service providers. This was a primary health center, and then they came back and they said, yeah, for medical we have to do all these tests. Every year you have to do all these tests. They also, part of the battery of tests that they asked for, they said every year the operator has to go for a full chest x-ray, has to go for full prostate cancer examination, regardless of age, regardless of whatever, regardless of what is the position sitting in the refinery doing, regardless also of sex. Yeah? So, you know, you have to be very careful when you are dealing with if you don't have the expertise in-house to be able to do. I'm not a physician, not a medical doctor, but I also understand these simple things, you know, about the human anatomy, you know, and what these guys were trying to do. So you have to be very, very careful when you're outsourcing, as I said. So anyway, what do we gain out of this? We have a risk inventory developed. We have a function that you can have policy development that is done. We work very closely. Our occupational health guys work very closely with HR. We have an industrial hygiene function also, and we work together. We partly contract some of the survey work now, but we still give oversight. In case of incident investigation also, it's very useful to have these people when you're doing incident investigation, because then they have a medical understanding of the possible root causes when you're doing root cause analysis. Training and development also, awareness programs, especially if you're doing wellness programs, etc. And community support and research and development also. So the key challenges that you'll have to conclude with: integrating the function into the business operations and functions. This is something which we faced big problems with, because, you know, we had to educate everybody within the organization about this function, and as I already explained at quite a bit of detail where you could possibly put the function. It depends on your organization and the considerations we already discussed. But also producing the business case. You see, producing the business case, the problem is with physicians like EHS engineers and practitioners like us, we are not, you know, we are not the sort of people who are very good at developing business case, because we are so passionate and so, you know, humanistic and, you know, passionate about our work and stuff like that. We sometimes are not able to, we find that it devalues what we are doing when we start putting dollars to people's health and things like that. But organizations are there to produce, you know, be socio-economically productive in society. We must understand that, must appreciate that, and therefore we must produce a good business case in case we want to pass this through. Occupational health is also a philosophy which is born from organizations' commitment to health and welfare of employees. So therefore, if your organization doesn't have that philosophy, then you are fighting a losing battle, right, with your ex-com. Application of also in a globalized organization, different standards are available in different jurisdictions. We operate in some 7-8 different places in the world, so we have some standard policies, but also we have to take into account and understand, you know, what we need to do in certain jurisdictions. In certain jurisdictions, the occupational health is very much governed, and we have to look at those standards and align our standards with where we work. And that concludes my presentations, and happy to take any questions and answers. Sorry, I maybe overran the time.
Yeah.